Okay, we're almost ready.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to call the June 26, 2021 meeting of the Board of Directors of El Dorado Irrigation District to order. Roll call, please.
Just for verification for the record, today's July 26th, 2021.
Oh, thank you.
Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Anzini, and Day present. Director Veerkamp is absent. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, and Clerk to the Board Sullivan present.
Okay, I'd like everyone to rise and remove their cover for the Pledge of Allegiance. And after the pledge, I'd like to take a moment of silence for all of the people that are affected by the wildfires that are currently raging, including the people who've lost their homes and businesses, people that have suffered from the smoke, and of course recognize the valiant effort of the firefighters. So, join me in the pledge. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Mr. President, along that same line, the Dixie Fire is now 198,000 and 2.5 miles before they even start to defend it.
I know that Michael had been our director, what's your name? Rafferty, thank you. Had always done the moment of silence, and I haven't been real regular about that, but I thought this occasion was very important. So thank you, Director Rafferty, and for that. Okay, we'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Director Anzini.
Second.
Thank you very much. Okay. Oh,
Alan, yeah.
it's all, the sound is,
A real person did it.
that's two.
We'll keep track. It's okay.
Okay, any board comments on the agenda? Any public comment on the agenda?
If members of the public would like to address the board at any public comment period during this meeting, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. With no public comment, then we'll call for the vote. Oh, we used the buttons again. Okay, so please vote. Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries. Thank you all. Moving to communications, General Manager Abercrombie, do you have employee recognition for us?
Actually, I have two. We received an email from an EID customer recognizing Randy Lurch, our EID meter technician, saying I'd like to commend him and EID for being very professional and courteous when we're out there working with them. So that's great news. And then also, Director Brian Veerkamp has been appointed to the 4-year term at LAFCO. So congratulations, Brian, and condolences.
Did you say 40?
Yeah, 40 years. No, 4. So someone else can do it after that. But those two are the awards and recognitions, and I'll have a staff report later.
Okay, thank you very much, and our congratulations to Mr. Lurch for the outstanding performance. Okay, at this point, we'll entertain public comment for any items that are not on the agenda.
No remote comment requested this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to communications, General Manager report.
Yes, I'd like to ask Daniel Newsom to come up and report on how great we're doing with our very low workers' compensation premiums. So Daniel?
Hi, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see all of your faces for the first time. Last couple, yeah, last couple times it was via Zoom. So for the third year in a row, we had a record low workers' compensation EMR rate. If you're unfamiliar with what an EMR rate is, it's based off of the claims and injuries that an organization has. 1.00 is baseline, and for the 2020-21 year, we were 0.59. So as a result, with the low EMR, the district workers' compensation premium has dropped to $234,000. Just to put that into context, in 2003, the district paid out 1.937 in workers' compensation premium, so a reduction in $1.7 million, which is fantastic. In 13 out of the last 18 years, you've seen the EMR rate continue to drop. So that shows that the district is continuously lowering the amount and severity of work-related injuries. So it's just yet another positive indicator the district continues to work safely, and the district's ongoing efforts to contain operating costs, in particular with regard to future workers' compensation premiums. We acknowledge with pride all district employees for their vigilance and their safety-sensitive mindship, including the leadership staff, Jim himself. It is clear that such safety awareness combined with proactive safety programs yields great results. With immense satisfaction, the district is poised to set a new record-breaking low EMR in 2022 and continue to build upon our existing success.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I want to just, again, thank the general manager for setting the example for our safety program. It starts at the top, and when he was first hired, it was given direction that he would really implement an aggressive safety program, and it has really paid off, so in millions of dollars. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, I think it's important that the guiding principles are more than just a paper on the wall, and our number one principle is 100% safety, and I believe that starts at the top and permeates through all of the employees. So thank you all very much for saving over $1.5 million that we don't have to tack onto the ratepayers. Excellent, excellent work.
Yeah, and not only great savings, but a lot safer and healthier people.
Yeah, well, that's
So-
exactly, not only the dollars, but good point, thank you. Okay, any comments from the Board of Directors?
Well, one is a comment. I have always followed George's sartorial dressing lead, and this is always sports shirt time, and you throw me off now. You're coming in with a tie on.
You didn't get the email?
No.
Neither did I, George.
Okay, on September 13th or whenever it is, I will wear my Hawaiian shirt,
Okay.
okay?
Thank you.
Put it on there.
So we're gonna have Hawaii Day on September?
That's not a bad
Okay,
idea.
we can do that.
And I do have a question. You don't have to answer it now, but we had discussed doing a review of the 2013. My mind just suddenly went blank, but the master plan. And just wondering if we have. I know with the drought we have a lot of other things going on, but do we have a ballpark target for when we might do that?
I had discussed that with Brian Mueller, and we had it on the tentative items list. It's not for August 8th, but I'll look it up and I'll let the board know when it's going to be there.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments from board members?
Sure.
Yeah, Director Anzini.
Right. One is, it's good to be back in the boardroom. I think some of us are either heavier or thinner, depending on our point of view of how the pandemic has been treating us. I want to compliment the staff on how well they have weathered through this storm, and I have a lot of respect and appreciation to what you have. And it's not an endurance race, but what it is a safe race. And I respect the fact that we take everybody into our midst of knowing that we are safe people and that we're providing water, and our wastewater facilities are well taken care of, and we just need to hold the line and make sure everybody is taken care of. So my appreciation is the staff for everything, all the way from the meter reader, the service worker in the streets, to the top. And my appreciation, because when you read up on the history, and Mr. Rafferty would understand this because he knows a lot of history, that 110 years ago or 102 years ago, we weathered a storm then, and it was completely different. So my appreciation to staff and my appreciation to the board for being all part of this team, and thank you.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Any other comments?
I'd just like to tag on the back of Manzini, Ms. Lori's comment. The Recreation Department has put up with a tremendous obstacle of dealing with this, and they've weathered it and done a great job also.
Thank you. Okay, moving to the consent calendar.
President Dwyer, staff is requesting that consent calendar item number 3 be pulled from the consent calendar.
Okay,
I'll move the consent calendar, absence item 3.
thank you, Director Day.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Any board comments on the consent calendar? Seeing none, any public comment on the consent calendar?
Does not appear to be any in-person or remote public comment at this time.
Thank you. Let's call for the vote.
Actually, please vote on your voting machine.
Please vote on your voting machine. Thank you.
All right, not calling.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Pushing the vote.
that's 3.
Maybe I'll get.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Okay. Now we'll address item 3, the drought resolution.
Thanks very much, President Dwyer. I will take this. The action that is agendized today is for the board to ratify Resolution 2021-009 to maintain the drought emergency. Recall that the board adopted that resolution at the last meeting in light of the conditions that we're facing. That resolution declared a stage 1 drought throughout the district's entire service area and authorized the general manager to declare a stage 4 drought emergency in the area of Outingdale in light of the challenging conditions that we face on the Middle Fork of the Cosumnes River and our diversion at that point. We have continued since that time to be able to make adequate diversions to serve our customers in that area until this weekend. And as of this morning, the general manager has declared a stage 4 drought emergency, and we've initiated our water hauling as of this morning. We were monitoring it very, very closely over the weekend, but today will be the first day that we'll be delivering water to that community. In light of that, the general manager has declared stage 4 in Outingdale, and those customers are being notified at this point in time. So I would request that the board today take other action, option 2, and ratify the drought, ratify the resolution 2021-009, and also ratify the general manager's declaration of a stage 4 drought emergency in the area of Outingdale.
Thank you, Brian. And then Dan, could you just show some of the operations information?
We're still working out the kinks on our side as well, so. is the board able to see the PowerPoint?
What you should be seeing is a beautiful Consumnes River picture of the dam dried up. No.
Well, I'll voice over here while we work out staff's kinks as well. So President Dwyer, we empathize for sure. As General Counsel had described in your resolution of June 28th, you authorized General Manager to continue to monitor conditions with staff and, when appropriate, move to that stage 4 status. We were able, through the efforts of staff on the June 25th, doing those emergency repairs with the sandbags, defer the obvious for almost a full month, which is pretty amazing. But we have since triggered that this weekend. I just have a few slides just to show you where we stand. So if you, next slide, please. So just to kind of orient, this has been our unofficial gauge, and that is the total flow of the Middle Fork Consumnes River as of Friday. And the water's been slowly spilling over the spillway as well as through various seeps and cracks in the dam itself. This was conditions as of Friday. Rudenko Adzakovic, our drinking water operations manager, providing daily updates to our leadership staff as to the status up there. And then things change as of this weekend. So slide 8, please, or next slide, please. Sorry. It was a pretty quick change, and we stopped spilling on Saturday morning, and it continued to go down. So at that point, the only water is going through and under the dam. So from a water quantity standpoint, obviously, we need to, the plant doesn't run continuously, but when it does run, we need about 100 gallons a minute of flow to run that plant. Next slide, please. And this is just conditions. Sunday, really no change. What we're trying to see are there ambient weather changes? That was just a little hiccup, and was the river going to come back? And when it didn't come back Sunday morning, I spoke with General Manager and asked him at that point, he decided it was appropriate to move to that stage 4 water emergency status for that community. Once that did happen, we had already had our potential potable drinking water hauler lined up, and we were in daily communication, so that was easy to mobilize those efforts. And as well as what's very important to us is our outreach to our customers in that community. So we'd actually already prepared our update, and that was launched earlier this morning, I believe. So Jenny Downey and our customer service staff are also reaching out via email and the various forms of communication to all 193 customers in that community have been notified of the move to stage 4. So it was inevitable, but we have finally reached that condition. But fortunately, we were able to defer, a good about almost 30 days exactly from when we would likely have otherwise had to. And that was able to save us about $65,000 in water hauling costs. So it just shows the cost savings of the efforts out there. But that's when now we'll maintain this until the storms return. Right now, you'll in your consent item, obviously you've already read, we're planning through the end of October. Hopefully we get a few early thunderstorms, just enough to bring the river back to stable water quality and water quantity as well as water quality. But right now, Rudenko had updated that with the lack of flow, algae, obviously water quality is a concern as well. We always need to make sure we meet that, but it's really a water quantity standpoint. So as of now, we'll continue hauling for about the next 4 months or so. So that's my update for you.
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
So the water trucks are starting today. It sounds like a stupid question, but when the water trucks go there, where do they put the water? Is there a tank?
Great question. Thank you very much.
Or a
I should have
reservoir?
described that. Thank you very much. I should have described that. So the board actually authorized to reconstruct one of the 2 water storage tanks. So this water will be connected at a designated disinfected location specifically for this purpose at the upper water tank within the Outingdale subdivision. And then from there, that's normally where the water treatment plant pumps to. And from there, the system will operate normally. It's a distance of about 5 miles from the dedicated location in the potable water system off Pleasant Valley Road. But you do cross 2 river drainages. It's not 5 miles of flat land, as you know, out there. So it's a bit of a haul, and it's about 4 to 5 trips per day. We're anticipating with the 50 gallons per person per day, around 22,000 gallons a day that we will move out there.
So each truck holds about 500?
The truck itself is a 6,500 gallon truck.
Okay.
But obviously, when you're doing this, you're not going to do 6,500 gallons. So that's where we think about 5,000 gallons
Okay.
per trip, roughly, something like that.
Great, thanks.
Any other board comments, questions?
Just one, I'll make a motion that we continue the emergency drought declaration and ratify the general manager's declaration of the stage 4 drought emergency at Outingdale. And God bless the folks there. We got to meet quite a few of them a few years back when last drought, and a lot of nice folks. But the lesson of Outingdale is be careful what you annex. And I think EID has learned that lesson and be a little more careful in, going forward in the future.
Very, very good point. But I think it also is a point that when we make a commitment, we follow through with it. And we have spent a lot of money in Outingdale refurbishing the tanks, currently doing the new intake, and now hauling water for 200 accounts. So good point. Thank you. I have a question about your presentation.
Please.
You know, just summarizing all the money that we've spent, and we had a discussion when we were talking about redoing the intake and alternatives, and one of those was a well. Given that there's a potential for an extended drought, is it time that we compare the cost of hauling to the cost of drilling and see if it's economic to even consider drilling a well? Do we own property there? Is that correct?
We do own some property, but I believe confidently that the prior engineering evaluation of that feasibility, because of the cost intake replacement, determined that there would not ever be sufficient yield for the quantity of water that is needed. So as I said, when that plant runs, it's 100 gallons a minute. My house is high yield, and that's 6.
Yeah,
A lot
right.
are 1 to 1.5. So it's a great question. I think we always look at alternatives, but given the frequency, unfortunately, we've had 2 extreme droughts within a short period of time. But given the frequency, I still think this is the most prudent course of action.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a?
Just a comment on your thunderstorms. I hope they're really wet because of these fuel conditions. We get a dry storm and this state's gonna light up like a torch again.
So we have a motion to approve option 2. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Anzini.
And President Dwyer, we are researching how we can recoup the funds from the governor's budget. There's funds being identified for water hauling, so we'll try and pursue that. We did it, 4 or 5 years ago in the last drought. Unfortunately, we were denied. We'll continue to pursue that recovery
Try
of
and-
funds.
Yep, good. Times are changing, so, and I'd also like to compliment the staff for having the foresight to go out with an RFP, get the bids from various contractors, and pick one before it was an emergency, and we had to award just to the nearest guy. So, thank you, Rodenko, for doing that.
Could I ask one more question, Mr. President? In the event we do get a wet storm and the river does come up, is this contract an interruptible one? We say, hey, we don't need it now for a week or 2, or?
Every day is on an as-needed basis, so.
Oh, perfect, okay.
If we get a time period where it's cool or people aren't visiting, a lot of folks are part-time. And so it's just basically per hour. So if you don't need 5 trips a day, they only need 2 trips, then we'd only be charged those 2 trips for that.
Excellent, thank you.
Actually, it's on an hourly basis, isn't
It
it?
is, yeah, it's hourly.
Okay. So we have a motion, a second. Board discussion, any public comment?
Former Director Rafferty, can you please approach the podium if you'd like to make a public comment? Director,
How many actual customers are present at Allendale? Other than,
Well, we don't, so there's 193 active accounts. So on an individual weekend, we don't monitor traffic, so I'm not sure how many folks each weekend, but we budget for 193 active uses of the public health and safety allocation of 50 gallons per person per day.
Is there is there a noticeable swing, like midweek to weekend as far as volume of water used?
That's another great question. I thought about that this weekend as we saw that trend as well. You know, during the summer, not as much. I know they do see some trends, but I don't think it's significant enough that would warrant any change to how we manage the system. But I do know that the patterns are a little bit different than what you expect in a normal neighborhood, if you say. So.
Okay, thank you for the board comments and questions and the public comment. Are there any online public comments?
No, sir.
Okay, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you. That's the end of the consent calendar. We'll move to information item number 8. You're back on, Dan, with status of the 2021 water supply.
Okay, President Dwyer, members of the board, good morning again. Dan Corcoran, Operations Director. Every month, we give you an update on the status of the current district water supply portfolio, our demand pattern, and looking at potential for extended drought conditions into next winter. Slide 2, please. Okay. We have a few different topics today, so I just highlighted these for you. Our July demands are tracking pretty consistent with, and perhaps even a little bit lower than what we had provided to you the end of last month. We do continue to have adequate water supply conditions for 2021, or adequate water supplies for conditions during 2021. Although obviously our biggest concern continues to be the end of the year, both at Folsom Reservoir and Jacobson Lake, and we'll dive into that in a little bit in a minute. And unfortunately, things are looking a little less favorable, not significantly, but a little less favorable to pull out of this drought later in the winter. You know, if you remember there's long-term climatic models, although I was reminded La Nina, but I remember earlier this year we had some indication that we were going to have a wet spring, and obviously that didn't happen. So, you know, take it what you will, but obviously we use all available intelligence in our water supply planning. And there's been quite a bit of broad as well as targeted public outreach efforts that we've endeavored on over the last month since the board's declaration on June 28th. Slide 3, please. These are just our standard water supply updates this is as of last Monday. No significant changes, just the typical trends you see this time of year. We continue to meet all of our water supply demands, both at Reservoir 1, Reservoir A, as well as exercise permit 2112, previously diverted water, as the board's aware of the curtailment. We're working very carefully to exercise our water right portfolio in light of current conditions. And Folsom Reservoir is continuing to trend on that projection of meeting that 200,000 acre-foot carryover by the end of September, which is important for the district's intake structure later this fall. Slide 4, please. We tried to make this slide a little bit more legible. I know it's always a big bowl of spaghetti noodles, but so what we did is the typical years, what we call that, we kind of made all those pastels. So you typically were operating in that 25 to 41,000. Remember, this is a 2-year reservoir. It's the only district 2-year reservoir. So we're in year 2 of these dry conditions. So now we're down in these lower conditions. And we've ticked up just maybe 100, 200 acre feet for end of year in the most conservative, very dry conditions. What you typically see if you look at the curves, October, November, December, you typically see that flattening out. We get a little bit of rain. Obviously, we have to plan for the worst, plan for no rain. And so that's why you see that slope continue. But if you look in almost every single year there, that's not the case. And what we hope we'll see some flattening this fall, but nevertheless, we continue to plan. So we haven't really been at this level since about 25 years, since 1994. So pretty significant, but nevertheless, the reservoir is doing what it was supposed to do. It's a 2-year reservoir, and we're meeting our supply demands, or our supply projections. Demand projections, excuse me. I have my own kinks working out here this morning. Slide 5, please. So just a quick snapshot of cross-section of California. As you've seen every day when you turn on the news, pretty much drought conditions across the entire state. Both the Cosumnes River, where Jacobson Lake and the South Fork American are in a condition 3, a D3, which is extreme. But we are actually, unfortunately, more favorable than some of the more notable areas in northern Sacramento Valley, as well as San Joaquin Valley, or D4, which is exceptional. You don't want to be exceptional in this case, and that is the worst designation. So we've now moved to drought declaration, drought emergency in 50 of the 58 counties, and that's why General Manager described some of these funding sources are starting to come available, where specifically the hauling is the one that we're looking at short term, see if we can qualify for some of that. Since your action end of last month, the governor has now also asked it statewide for a 15% voluntary reduction, they call it, what we call voluntary conservation. So it really conforms to your action as of last month.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out, or maybe just a coincidence, but we asked for a 15% voluntary reduction, and the governor immediately copied us. My gosh.
Leading the way.
Right. Slide 6, please. Okay, and it looks like we're on track to use about district-wide about 5,500 acre-feet this year, which is about 4% over last year. So you can see, obviously, as compared to that spring trend, we're getting much more closer to that typical demand. That's pretty much what we expected. This is even a little bit more favorable, I would say. We were thinking 8 to 10 above, but and so really what you see is in the spring, everybody turns on their sprinklers, but by the middle of the summer, everybody turns on the sprinklers, and now it's just a matter of asking for that voluntary conservation to try to get below that number, hopefully at some point. So I think there's two main factors. Obviously, we got our typical irrigation demands, and then it hasn't been too long, but I think some of those conservation efforts and some of our outreach public meetings, people are getting our e-notifications, getting the waterfront, seeing, obviously aware of the board's action late last month. And we'll start to see more of that as the summer goes on. We don't have any real significant changes. Like I said, 100, 200 acre feet to our end of season projection for Jacobson, as well as that very conservative 15,000 at the end of the calendar year. Slide 7, please. So I think this kind of does it in a nutshot. I hope there's not too many lines on this. So red is 2020, and our dashed is where we project we will be, and hopefully we'll get some conservation. We'll continue to go below that. You see, we kind of more towards the typical demand curve, and we've included that dash line, and that is our voluntary target, and that's 15% below 2020. So that red dash line is 15% below the yellow line, which was our last year demands. I mean, you see, we sort of crossed over that 2013 pattern, so obviously, word is getting out that there's a drought, and people are recognizing current conditions and trying to do what they can. So pretty nice, change of course over the past 30 days.
Dan, I have
Yes.
a question, because, and I know the governor even mentioned this, that some conservation is already baked in
Yeah.
from 2013, from those days, and it gets harder and harder. The sacrifices become greater and greater. I'm just curious, do you know off the top of your head where we're at in comparison to 2013? Or if not, maybe next month, include that in the chart. I just would like to see, our long-term conservation, how we're doing on that.
Sure. So make sure I understand your question. So the 2013 curve is that dark blue line. So that's a direct comparison to 2013.
Right there in front of me.
So that's the first question, but I think you had two, and I wanted to make sure. So we have crossed below, so you can see that last month, in part, I think, except for that one heat wave, more favorable conditions. I think you had two parts in your question, and the other one is that fixed conservation. that's something that we're continuing to watch. I didn't get, in our initial outreach efforts, haven't got a lot of concern about that, but I think that's one thing, you know, as you get more and more efficient, it's hard to say more, and one thing we'll continue to watch going forward. But I haven't really seen that as a point of concern yet from our customer base. Most people just are responding to our suggested irrigation times because that's the easiest way. People still have irrigation, and we're hoping that that'll help us get closer to that goal.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I agree, our customers have been very responsive in the past to our request for voluntary reduction. But to Director Day's point, you can only change your shower head once.
Right.
And you can't do it every time. And
Right.
so I think there'll be a diminishing return, but there are still many things our customers can do to help the situation and make sure they have water next year. And, you know, adjusting sprinkler times is probably the best.
Great. Just to put a little input on that, one of the nice things is I bought one of those Ratio 3 controllers for my irrigation, put it in my garage. I don't have to run from the backyard to the garage to try to stop it and put it on because I could just do it on my smartphone. And I got my rebate. And it was on my bill, which was really good. So my next step is toilets. So. But most customers, you know, I think that it's really important for us to share with them the water conservation, you know, things that we have to renew our brains and remind ourselves that what we did in '79 versus what we done 5 years ago. A lot of people just, I think we've done some education, but we just have to keep being a squeaky wheel and remind them to our detriment because that reduces our income. And people don't realize that. So, you know, I think the important thing is the water conservation and the education. Yeah, I think it really is. So hopefully I'll save money.
Yeah, Jesse and our Public Relations Department have done a pretty good job already with news releases, press releases, the waterfront. But you're exactly right. We need to just keep sending the message.
Just maybe a little more value added. We did have the water supply and demand reports that we produce, and this is total demand, not a unit demand. And I think Director Day's question would be maybe better framed in a unit demand. Just from 2013 to date, we're approximately 33% lower on a unit demand in the El Dorado Hills area and 28% lower in the upper regions. So from a unit demand, people have made changes in their landscape, changes in their water use appliances. So I think we've done an excellent job. And even if we don't make the 15% goal that the board approved up to 15%, our customers have responded extraordinarily well over the last 4 or 5 years.
Thank you. Exactly. That was my point. Thank you, Jim.
We're one of the fastest growing along, I think, probably the city of Roseville agencies. And so I think Jim Manager's point is very important that, you know, on a 1% annual basis, there's 10 years that passed. So you have 10% more customers we're serving, and obviously we're not. So it just shows it's important to look at that per capita consumption going forward. We'll probably provide some metrics along those lines.
Before you leave this slide, it's just interesting to note that our summertime demand is 6 times our winter demand.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and these are weekly updates on demand that we started during the last drought. So the metric's a little bit different. So this is looking at, since the drought declaration, how have we been performing? So both on, so the board's specific request was to ask for our customers to voluntarily save 15% from your last usage during 2020. So these are weekly updates, and that's the red line now. So it shows as compared to 2020 is the blue line, and we're in 2021 in the green line there. So this is potable. You see on a weekly, we're about 6% higher. So you see, depending upon how you slice it, we obviously look at our water's in storage. We're diverting for water from storage. So we look on a monthly time step. But this information feeds into some regulatory reporting that our engineering department provides. And then the next slide is just the similar data, but for our recycled water customers. And I won't speak too much to this because obviously we'll have Tracy come up in a minute and dive into some of the details and how we're managing the recycle water system in these challenging times. Okay, next slide, please. It's important to kind of give us regional perspective of how our customers as compared to all of our neighbors. So this is a slide that was shared by the Regional Water Authority. So this is all the water purveyors in the greater, really kind of the 6-county region of Sacramento area, or at least 3-county region. As you see, everybody was significantly higher this spring. So we weren't alone. We're all responding to the hydrology, to the spring, very, very dry weather. Unfortunately, they're still crunching the June numbers, so it's a little bit lagging, but we'll continue to show this data going forward. It's important to know how our customers are as compared to the rest of the region. Slide 11, please. So as I mentioned, I won't dive into this too much more here. We haven't really gotten any updated projections that are of concern as it relates to Folsom, or any more concerning, I should say. Obviously, things are going to be tight later this fall, and it really just depends if it's going to start raining. But at least through our main demand period, our water supply intake is secure. And then going into the holiday season, if we had to, we could rely on Jacobson Lake to meet those demands if for some reason that facility was not operational. We don't project that to be the case, but we can meet through our peak summer demand when that facility has to be online. We'll continue to follow and give you regular updates. Slide 12, please.
Are we continuing to divert into Jenkinson Lake?
No, that we basically ran out of sufficient water to do so around, I think, the 10th to the 13th of June, do you recall? Something like that, yeah, mid-June. So we moved our targeted volume. But it's important to note that that supply functions in concert with our Reservoir 1 supply. So we aim for a target, and we hit that target, and then we have to allocate the rest of the supplies so that Reservoir 1 has enough water to operate for the rest of the season. So we will fully utilize that water right, but we have to make projections and plan out very carefully about how you spend your budget on that. So.
And I guess as a sales plug, this is also why it's important that we refurbish the intertie between Res 1 and Res A.
Exactly. So as we had this slide prepared before this weekend's events, so we continue to implement those emergency measures at Outingdale, and that did buy us, as I said, about a month. And now these water hauling will continue until at least probably Halloween, maybe into November, and we're hoping to get a couple storms to resume. You know, just because you get a little bit of water, you got to make sure that obviously the water quality is also there. And after the river's been dry, you can imagine the first storm or two isn't the most crystal clear water, so that's something that Rodenko staff will be following very closely before we feel appropriate to resume diversions and getting the treatment plant ready to go again. Okay, slide 13, please. And now I'm going to turn this over to Tracy to discuss recycled water for you for a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Mr. President, members of the board, and the public, good morning. Tracy Crane, wastewater recycled water manager. So when it comes to recycled water, we're fortunate that the district had the foresight to develop a recycled water system and make that available to our customers. As of last week when we did the productions, the overall demand for the season was up about 10 to 11%. And we closely coordinate. So potable water makes up about 17 or 18% of the overall seasonal demand for recycled water. But in the 100 days or so of the hottest part of what I call the peak recycled water season, it can be as much as 30 or 40% of the overall volume of recycled water that we deliver. So we have to closely coordinate between Rodenko, the drinking water staff, and the wastewater staff, and we have standing biweekly meetings where we go through and look at the current conditions, projections, and decide what we need to do. The current conservation on the drought declaration we don't expect it to have a dramatic impact on the baseline flows of the treatment plant because, as you said, you know, most of the conservation efforts will be towards outdoor use, and you won't see a lot of change from the baseline flows of the treatment plant. Next slide, please. So this is the overall projections. As Dan mentioned a little bit ago, on a week-to-week basis since the drought declaration, it looks like we may have seen a slight improvement, but this is representative of the 10% overall increase in the recycled water demand so far this season.
That's a combination of new accounts and just it's been really hot and dry.
Correct, yeah. And it really shot up. We've seen a little bit of the modulation, similar like you see in water. We saw a really steep increase, but as the summers kind of people have settled in, it kind of sort of flattens out more to a normal pattern. Next slide, please. So this is a simplified diagram, very simplified, of just where the sources of the recycled water comes from. So the bottom purple is the actual flows at our 2 treatment plants, the Deer Creek, El Dorado Hills facility. You notice it's very flat, and even in the next slide, it remains very flat because both of the treatment plants are flow equalized. They have equalization tanks, so their flows remain consistent. The little green band in the center there represents the reservoir storage at El Dorado Hills. And that storage is very important in the flexibility of the system. And then you can see above the green, everything in blue must be made up from our potable water system. So that's just a very simplified diagram so that you could kind of see where the things come from. Next slide, please. In actual operation, it looks more like this, where you see that we're able to use that storage reservoir at the El Dorado Hills facility to make up days when the potable system might become constrained. And then on days where there is more water available, we can conserve that for later on in the season. Next slide, please. So as I said, that storage reservoir is very important. It's sort of, even though it's a small percentage of the overall usage of the whole seasonal, it really represents operational flexibility, and it's the leading indicator of what we have available to us at any given time. So what you're looking at here, we have a spreadsheet model that's a declining balance on that reservoir, and the actual dark lines are the reservoir level, what's left in the reservoir. The bands across the top and the bottom are the max flow, the max level in the reservoir, and then the minimum level, the usable volume. And then the light are the light sort of transparent are the flows for the season. And we're able to go in and look at it. If you look at the top model run, if we're using roughly an average 7-day average of 400,000 gallons from that reservoir, we're able to make that reservoir last into October. And the goal here for us is to start the season at the beginning of the season with that reservoir clear full and end at the end of the season with that reservoir empty. So the top model is sort of where we're standing right now. If we just average about 400,000, we're able to stretch that reservoir volume out into October. And the bottom is reservoir model is the hypothetical if potable water went away. And if we didn't have any potable water, you can see that red line drops down around August 1st. We have about 8 or 10 days before we wouldn't be able to meet those peak demands anymore. Although I would say I'm not here to sound the alarm. We have our meetings every bi-weekly meetings, and right now the staff still feels like we're going to be able to meet the customer's demand for the 2021 season. So the real concern would be if we have longer term drought, then that would be a concern. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Corcoran.
So Tracy,
I have
just a question. The bottom chart is a strategy for prolonged drought and more severe emergency requirements for ourselves or mandated to us by the governor, which would say we suddenly, in an emergency situation, we stop the recycled water service totally. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're
And-
always watching if something happens, because the system is basically, in the current climate, is running at sort of max output. We got the, we're giving it all she has. So the bottom chart is to let us know if potable went away and we just couldn't rely on it at all, how long do we have before we would run out of the reservoir volume and not be able to make up the difference for meeting the peak demand? And it's roughly about 10 days. And later in the season, as we get further in the season, as you see that slope come down, that it gets less and less, right? But hopefully we're closer at the end of the season where it's not a problem. So we use this chart at our bi-weekly meetings just to let everybody know. And it also enables us, if something did happen to the potable water, to give our customers, our board, and our folks, a heads up of here's where we're gonna be.
Yes.
When we went through this exercise a few years ago, we went to the state to quit diverting water, or I think it was significant reduction. I can't remember the numbers when we, down the creek, was it Coyote Creek, or what's the name? I forget the name of the creek. And have we approached the state about doing that to stop wasting our recycled water?
That's a good question, Director Osborne. So our Deer Creek treatment plant is required to put 500,000 gallons a day down Deer Creek to maintain in-stream flows. And General Manager Abercrombie looks like he might have some more information, but my understanding is we approached them last time and it wasn't, they didn't give us any.
Well, it just, it'd be worth another approach. You know?
It was not only no, it was no capitalized.
I know, but
So I don't think it's worth,
it doesn't hurt to beat them over the head again, you know? I mean, when we're having to supplement potable water for recycled water because and that's historically, before the recycle program, that was a dry creek. It had no water going through it. It was dry in the summer, and it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that we would have to spend 500,000 gallons a day down a creek that was dry before. So I would like to see us approach the state again and at least remind them of their no.
But their argument is going to be it's a riparian habitat now.
Yeah, but we can reduce the flow.
Well, we did, and it seemed to work out pretty good, but that might be next year, hopefully not, if hopefully
You
the.
know.
we have
Well,
a really wet
anyway,
winter.
just keep that in the bank.
I would add one point. We are in the middle of an automation upgrade project at the Deer Creek that's gonna help us really regulate and hit that minimum in-stream flow number right to closer to the gallon to make sure that we do squeeze all of the recycled water out of that system that we can, and that should be helpful.
Yes, Director Day.
I think George had brought this up not too long ago. Just wondering again, this might be our shot with state money or federal money, stimulus money, of closing the loop on the recycled system, which way back when it was started was such a great concept, but the missing piece is the storage, summer storage. And so are we looking at pursuing any grants or any help as far as creating a better permanent storage for the summertime so we can close the loop on it?
So, good question, Director Day. So it would actually be wintertime storage, that we would be off-season storage, right?
Yeah, be building,
So as I mentioned, potable water represents about 17 or 18% of the overall seasonal. That 17 or 18% is in the 200 to 300 million gallons range. So it's not a small project to build a reservoir that can store 300 million gallons. And there's some challenges to taking recycled or treated wastewater that has some nutrient value, which is one of the things that makes it great for recycled water. But also when it's exposed to sunlight, it tends to create algae. So I know that we have committed to looking at it again, but my guess is it has a very high price tag for the amount of the small percentage of the recycled water season, of the small percentage of the overall demand that it.
would it likely be an open reservoir type?
200
storage?
million, that would be my guess. Yeah, that's a big reservoir.
Not something, not tanks would not be
Right,
able.
that'd be a lot of tanks and a lot of.
if Brian, I wish Brian was here. I think if my memory serves me correctly, it was 5,000 acre feet of water and it was over $50 million. And who wants to spend $50 million on a very small water storage project? I've asked Brian to dust that off and just update the board as an information item, but it's extremely expensive. And again, we'll bring something back for the board to consider.
I would add that even when you store it, if you've stored it for that long a period outside, it's going to require more treatment before it could be delivered as recycled water. Everything is feasible, but that was my understanding of the project.
Director Anzini?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking those questions, but it's always been asked of me in my coffee clutches, we talk about local policies. And one of the things is, what about desalinization? I'm going, not. Well, what about recycled water? Well, people up this part of the hill don't have the recycled water option. And the most use would be, I would think, maybe up the hill a little further, because we do have some large water users, Cameron Park Golf Course, that it would love to be on recycled water. That would reduce their costs and actually make a big deal with water conservation. So bring in a small pipe, but again, it's the storage thing. And with the stimulus money and maybe infrastructure, it seems to me that that would be a win-win situation if we could do that for our area.
And for the record, I'm happy to look at all the infrastructure that we're willing to put in. But I think one of the points that we're trying to make this morning is that we're utilizing 100% of the recycled water that's available to us right now. In fact, so much so that we have to rely on potable water to help us meet the peak demand.
And more storage would help.
And more storage would certainly help, yes. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Corcoran. Thank you.
We're almost done here. Okay, as we discussed at the beginning, we do look at the long-term climatic models, El Nino, Southern Oscillation, and so more potential for La Nina, colder, drier conditions. A slight increase in the likelihood. I like to give positive news, but not very significant unfavorable news. But nothing is. It's not trending in the right direction, I would say, at this point. Still quite a ways out. We'd like to see, at least a half degree, maybe 3/4 of a degree of above normal long-term in the eastern equatorial Pacific. So lingo there. But I think really what we're most concerned about, and this is something you've seen, especially in May this year, when all the state forecasters, is this concern about the cumulative moisture deficit. That's the new lingo being added to Webster's dictionary, and that's so you have multiple back-to-back dry years, the underlying ground being so dry that it's going to take a while. You got to keep watering before that water is actually going to run off and not soak in. So even if we do get a few thunderstorms, it's going to be quite a ways before we actually see surface flows again. And that will be, as we start to see trends at Outingdale, that'll give us sort of a hint. We'll see. That's kind of our easiest small barometer, and then we'll move forward from there in Project 184, et cetera. We're fortunate in Project 184 because, as you know, the upper area is mostly overlying bedrock, so it's a little bit different than the lower watersheds and why they were so significantly impacted. Okay, next slide, please. We talk recreation for a sec. This is not something we've talked about to date, but we've got some things happening over at Sly Park. And a number we haven't, we're starting to approach a level where we start to impose speed restrictions. And typically that happens in the winter, so you don't normally hear about it. And that's at 65%. We're looking, based upon current demands, probably Monday the 9th, trying to give people as many weekends as possible while still ensuring a safe opportunity. That speed limit restriction is actually specifically written for the reservoir in El Dorado County Code, which was kind of interesting. So there's another section applies to Union Valley, et cetera, but there is a specific code section we've listed there for Jacobson Lake. So it's 15 miles an hour, so that'll happen, end of August. Yeah, right.
But too slow for.
So the timing will be earlier, but we're hoping we were able to make it through most of the summer. Obviously, we see a lot of boats coming up the hill because they can't go to Folsom, they can't go to a lot of other places. So we've been fortunate to provide actually a pretty great opportunity. If you think about what another unanticipated benefit of that Hazel water, if we had not moved that water to Hazel, about the second weekend of May, we would have had imposed this restriction. So no water skiing or anything all summer on Jacobson Lake. So it would have been a much different opportunity. So that wasn't obviously the primary intent was for water supply, but there was another recreational benefit that occurred. So next slide, please. Okay, I've got a couple slides on public outreach. Using a variety of means and methods. I see Rick Anzini's happy to hear about this, as all we are, and we like hearing from our customers. As in the one I gave at the beginning, actually in the prior, is where our primary focused outreach is to those 193 customers that are most affected by current hydrology, and those are the folks in Outingdale moving through some really tough conditions right now. In addition to that, we did do a news release following your declaration on June 28th. That went to all the news outlets, all of our customers that subscribe to e-notification, social media, Facebook, Nextdoor. And then to all of our customers, amazingly, every time I look at that number, 89% of our customers have an email. So 89% of our customers received a direct message regarding that action at the end of June. Next slide, please. Then we did get that, it's a beautiful day outside today, but it wasn't too long ago when it was about 108 up here. And so as we faced that first really tough weekend, we did ask customers, we know you're doing your best, please try to conserve this weekend. And I think overall the production to plan, it was up, but it wasn't off the charts. So hopefully people did respond to that. And then we've done a number of presentations, both to the El Dorado Hills and Cameron Park CSDs, the city of Placerville in conjunction with their Stage 1 declaration, Farm Bureau, Kiwanis, and there's a few other upcoming, both from the board members and staff, a couple of upcoming presentations. And this list will obviously continue to grow every month when we give you our update. Next slide, I think that's it. Oh, I have one more, I'm sorry. And then obviously we mentioned the waterfront newsletter. And we actually did put a little tag on the bottom of these bills that are going out now. And we've updated our website. It links to a lot of the regional strategies for indoor and outdoor water conservation. Okay, next slide.
Yes, Director.
I have a question, Dan. Just dawned on me, September 15th, when we officially start releasing water out of Silver, based on our agreement with Amador County, is there any intention or plan or even thought to open up the diversion again into Sly Park, diverting out of the river? Or can we do that? I don't.
Well, we hydraulically we could, but as when we were talking a couple of minutes ago, we're actually fully utilizing a consumptive water right with the Res 1 demands for the rest of the season. So if I moved it through there, then we'd have to turn off Res 1 earlier. So it's a zero-sum game.
Okay, gotcha.
So we're about 100% efficient on our every drop of water this year.
Just dawned on me, just ask.
All ideas are good ideas this year, so.
Any other board questions or comments? Yes, Director.
Thank you for your presentation for the Cameron Park Community Services District. I zoomed in and watched the presentation. I got good comments back, so
Great.
I really appreciate professional. Well done.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of people that go into putting those presentations together, so thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment on this information item?
None remotely.
President Dwyer, I'd just like to acknowledge Dan and his staff. This has not been an easy year coming off COVID and now trying to manage the limited water supply with increasing demands. It's done an outstanding job, so thank you and your staff, Dan.
Thank you. Okay. Next, we have information item number 9, the FEMA generator.
This was a good news story that we knew last board meeting, but Liz did a lot of work on this, and I wanted to postpone it so she can make the presentation, so.
Great.
I'm trying to get it right now. See. I'm trying to get it. It wasn't on the extra. I just put it on. No. No, look. This was this morning, so I have it broken out.
Alrighty. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Liz Carrington, Senior Civil Engineer here at the district. This morning I'll be presenting an information item regarding the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program update. Previous board actions. Oh, next slide. On June 24th, 2019, the board adopted a resolution authorizing the submittal of grant applications to the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal-OES. Next slide, please. Summary of issues. The district recently received approval for over $1.8 million in hazard mitigation grant program funding. This funding is to support the installation of backup power generators at 22 water and wastewater pump station and lift station facilities. The overall intent of this project is to provide critical public health and safety functions during a power outage. Next slide, please. For reference, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, or HMGP, is administered by FEMA. The program dedicates federal funding to reduce the risk of loss of life and property from future disasters, and the application process begins once a presidentially declared disaster has occurred, and this is part of the recovery effort. Next slide, please. So in California, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal-OES, acts as the main applicant to FEMA. And then local agencies such as EID, we act as a sub-applicant. So we work directly with Cal-OES, and then Cal-OES works with FEMA. Next slide, please. Disaster Declaration 4407-DR, it was declared on November 12th of 2018 in response to the Camp and Woolsey fires in Butte and Los Angeles County. And then immediately after the declaration, all California counties were deemed eligible and also welcome to submit sub-applications for HMGP projects. Next slide. The sub-application process is quite rigorous. It requires defining a scope of work, performing a preliminary base of design and cost estimate. And then that cost estimate is used to perform a benefit cost analysis, which is performed in the FEMA developed program, which compares the cost of the project versus the benefits. And so to qualify, your project needs to have a 1.0 or higher. And then lastly, the agency that's submitting needs to demonstrate that they can perform long-term maintenance of the project and continue with the intent.
Stay on that slide for a second, if you will, please. I think you said it's quite a rigorous process.
Yes.
And I can certainly personally attest to that, having applied for some of these for fire safe and prevention. And these little bullets, behind each one of those bullets is about 1 million government forms and 300 pages of instruction. The cost-benefit analysis itself is like solving a jigsaw puzzle. It's really tough. And so I didn't want to leave the impression that, oh, you just scratch out a scope of work, throw together a budget and push the button. There's a lot of work that goes into this.
Absolutely, yes, and I'd like to shout out special thanks to Rudenko and Tracy for assisting with that benefits cost analysis. A lot of work went into that of determining, PSPS likelihood and wildfires and the number of customers impacted. So a lot of information went into that program. So thank you to Rudenko and Tracy. Alrighty, next slide. So when the sub-application became available, the district's engineering and environmental staff thought this would be a great opportunity to obtain some non-rate funding for backup generators. And the overall intent of this project was for continuous public health and safety functions, in particular water and wastewater conveyance, and then also to maintain consistent fire flows during these emergency outages. Next slide. Staff included 22 stations, ranging all the way from El Dorado Hills to Camino Heights. We tried to definitely cast the net very broad and include any stations that did not currently have a generator and that could also spatially accommodate one. There are still a handful of stations that were not included. So our ops has been very innovative with trying to look at solar panels or battery packs just to maintain communication. So, although we might not be able to fit a generator and run the station, at least we'll be able to see what the station's doing and assess when we need to go and respond. Next slide. I've included photos of a couple of stations that are included in the application. And so just for perspective, during an outage, our staff, it's operations all hands on deck, running around to all the different lift stations, transporting the generator, hooking them up, either pumping down the wet well or pumping water through the distribution system. And so it's quite an effort of constant mobilization and demobilization of generators. So this project will really, really help ops during these outage events. Next slide. So the scope of work for this project is to perform some preparatory site work, so minor fence work as needed, some conduit work and some concrete flat work. Install the backup generator, install an automatic transfer switch, and then also integration with our SCADA system, just so we can see what the generator is doing, any alarms, statuses, and whatnot. And then also staff decided to coordinate this project with an existing PLC replacement project that we already had on the CIP. This is to replace 4 PLCs that we have at the sewer lift stations. And the thought behind that is we have a contractor there on site already. We'll reduce mobilization and eliminate any redundant programming that would be required. So, next slide. The overall project schedule, I'd like to jump right into design and then solicit the bid package, hopefully at the beginning of 2022. Perform construction in 2022 and 2023, and cross our fingers, hope that generators are there and ready to run summer of 2023. And then the grant is, we are required to complete this project within 3 years, so, all hands on deck. Next slide. Staff is we're not requesting any funding at this time, but I did want to include this slide just so everyone, has a perspective going into it. Total project estimate as of 2019 was $2.4 million. The HMGP will provide a 75% reimbursement of those costs. So the district funds will cover the remaining 25%, as well as the PLC replacement portion of the project. And so all of these costs will be included in the next CIP round for the 2022-2026 CIP. All right, any discussion or questions?
I have a question.
Yes,
One of the
Director.
challenges in this whole public service power shut-off arena has been keeping the generators fueled. In their design, what is the anticipated runtime for these generators?
Director Osborne, thank you. It's a great question. Our fleet manager, supervisor, we actually have every single generator asset, runtime, fuel type, and routes that are all laid out. So when we enter a public safety power shutoff, we have designated crews that know how often to go around. Those are for the sites that we can fill by ourselves with dedicated fuel stations. Other than that, the larger, like the intake at the Folsom Lake pump station when that went down, or Reservoir A, we do have a Hunt and Sons from across the street there. We're a priority, obviously, a public safety partner to have those on a fueling route. So we make sure we don't get that sputtering sound of running out of
Yeah,
fuel. I
but
can
on this
guarantee it.
design, how big of fuel tanks are we anticipating for the new permanent installations?
I don't think we're asking for anything outside the normal in terms of fuel tank size, because we can fit them into the routes of where we're going to go. So typically they have a embedded secondary storage. So if there's a leak in the primary storage, and that's usually called in the belly underneath the generator, the fixed unit, that's typically the design I anticipate. Yes, okay. Ask the project engineer, make sure. I anticipate that's the design we will once again do for this project. So
Okay, thanks.
Any other board questions or comments? I think that this is a one-time savings, obviously, of almost $2 million, because I believe we probably would have done this whether we got the FEMA money or not, because we need these to provide consistent service and dependable service, both in water and wastewater, to our customers. So not only did you and your team save almost $2 million of our capital, but also the operational improvements, not having to get the generators, deliver the generators, make leasing contracts and all that stuff. So year to year, you're gonna save operating costs as well. So hats off to the engineering staff and to you for pursuing this, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to, oh, I'm sorry, thank you. That's 4, maybe 5. Do we have any public comment on the presentation?
It does not appear that we have any public comment or remote comment at this time.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to action items. Finance.
Move 10.
Second.
You gonna let them off the hook that easy?
For clarification, Director Osborne was speaking about action item number 10, and I'm assuming he wanted to move option 1 of action item number 10.
And we have a motion and a second by Director Anzini. Any board comments or questions? Okay, any public comment?
There does not appear any remote or in-person public comment at this time.
Okay, before we vote, I'll just say, this is really the nuts and bolts of the money. The warrant register is the bills that we pay every week. So if they're down into the details of what it costs to operate the EID. And so it's important that people take a look at those. They're in the board packet. If you're interested on who do we pay and how much, the details are in there. Enough said, so please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 11, engineering.
All right, good morning, members of the board. My name is Kerry Muchler. I'm the senior civil engineer for the district, coming to discuss the design replacements for what we're calling the lettered flume projects. It's easy to determine that all the flumes here have letters behind them. So it's forms 45A, 46A, 47A, and 47B. Next slide, please. So the previous board actions was our adoption of the CIP last year, of which this was a part of that, subject, of course, to funding availability. Next slide. So the project sites. So the first one we'll start off with is flume 45A. I'm going to use my little pointer here to kind of see where it's at. It's just little flume right here. Do you want
If you're going to use the pointer, please refer to where on the screen
Yeah.
that you're pointing for the members of the public participating remotely.
So you can see the outline where it says right there, but it's a small segment of flume. Notice that we've got Highway 50 directly below the flume, followed by then the American River. Next slide. The next three flume sections are in relative close proximity to each other. They're separated by about 2 miles between 46A and 47B. Again, we have flume 40, or the Highway 50, right below. What makes these a little bit more critical is that we have cabins and residential below each of these flume sections. So 47B, 47A, and 46A. Note also, I'll point out 47A, we have an access road that goes already to the flume section. We will be needing to work on access for flumes 46A and 47B. This, if you can see it, 47B, this is our access road, what we call the flume access road for this segment, and it'll show up in a photo here in a section, in a second, how we're maybe being able to get access with that. But again, that's that arrow, just that red line right below 47B there.
You mentioned residential down below those flumes. Is that one of the tracks?
No, not one of the tracks.
Oh.
But there are residents in that area, especially right below 46A and 47A. There's a group of homes that we know that people are there full-time. Next slide, please. So what we're facing with these flumes is that, these are all wooden flumes. They are in various different states of degradation. And, most of the timbers that were installed at a time where now structural stuff has increased. And so they are undersized and overstressed. And we'll show some of the stuff that we're
I
experiencing
think you use
with
the same chart every time.
that. Well, they were all constructed about the same time,
Right,
so
I got it.
it makes it a little easier. So some statistics on our flume. We have actually what we call a 145A is got some fiberglass in it. And we're getting some delamination on that fiberglass. They all range in size between 120, 130 feet to 200 feet in length. These are flume segments that we are hoping that if everything works out right, our crews will be able to do. You remember back in a couple of years ago, we did Flume 47C. Our crews kind of got their feet wet with that. These are all of the similar length and going to be a design. So we feel pretty confident if time and allows and budget that our guys will be able to handle these during the outages. Next slide. So this is Flume 45A. This is our fiberglass section. So if you notice the footbridge there, you'll see this, this segment right here. And for the people on watching via Zoom, it's just the left-hand side of the flume there. You see that different colored segment. That is the fiberglass section. That I think it was done kind of as an experiment to see how if it would last a little longer with our wood. We didn't get the length that we had hoped with that. So. Next slide. This is showing the supports, how they've been rebuttressed over the years. This stuff in the foreground is the stuff our guys have come in to add additional support. And then you notice right below this segment right here, you can see where we've added additional cross sills in there, again, to add some strength to get this through. Next slide. So kind of go through the next few slides. They're all in similar conditions. This is Flume 46A. This is the one that we're got to work out how we're going to get to this one exactly. Possibility of some access roads above it we're trying to investigate now, but we're going to have to determine that during design. You'll see that we have two different segments here. One that's been lined, that's this darker wood in the foreground of the picture and in the background right there. And this part is still the original timbers from the last redo of this flume in wood back in 2011. Next slide. So this is again the under support structure. This shows again where we've got some additional buttressing in the low part of the slide, right in this area, and a little bit more along this segment right there. Next slide. This is Flume 47A. This is just upstream from that Hazel Creek tunnel where we take water into Sly Park. Upstream or things. Next slide. This one, you'll notice that all the timbers on this one are located on the ground, which adds to some of the degradation with the water. When we water up, it takes a day or two for the wood to seal. And so that, again, we get some degradation on the wood because of that. Next slide. This is 47B. Those stairs right there go to what we call the access road. It's rather steep, but we'll see if we can't, during design, find a way to get down to this segment and be able to get equipment in to rebuild. And then next slide shows the underside again. Similar to what we saw with the other flumes. The timber, these again are resting on the dirt and need some work. All right, next slide. So the scope of the work that we're going to be doing is to get the replacement and stabilizations for all four flumes. The geotechnical analysis will be done to help determine what our soil types are underneath, to see how far down we're going to have to go with if we do the MSE walls or if we're doing just concrete abutments with flume sections, get those worked out. And then, as I mentioned, the accesses for 46A and 47B will be also done. Next slide. So we had 3 proposals on our RFP, GHD, Gannett Fleming, and MGE. All these firms have done flume designs for us in the past. GHD was our low bid, and we looked at the number of hours, not just the cost, but the number of hours that they associate with each task. And they're all in relatively the same scope with that. So we feel confident that, yes, GHD is able to get this work done for that price. Next slide. So the environmental review, we did go out, this is going to be subject to CEQA. We did go out early in the spring to get the biological surveys done for any rare plants. We try to get those done in the spring, obviously, when everything is blooming. So we have that part that's been done, and we're waiting for the reports on that. We do need to still go out and get the cultural assessments done. And so we have some funds that we're requesting in the package to be able to get those evaluations done to see if we have any stuff from the old construction in the area. And depending on how those reports come back, we may need to come back for additional funding, but we'll see how those pan out before moving forward with any additional funds. Next slide. So the breakdown that we have is the cost for GHD's services at $368,000. Capitalized labor for both engineering and environmental staff was at $110,000. The $25,000 is for those cultural studies, bringing a total to $503,268 for the design. Next slide. So board options. Option 1 is to award a contract to GHD Inc. in the amount, not to exceed amount of $368,268 for design of flumes 45A, 46A, 47A, and 47B, and authorize additional funding of $110,000 for the capitalized labor and $25,000 for the environmental studies, for a total funding request of $503,268 for, again, what we're calling the lettered flume projects. Recommendations are option 1.
Director Osborne?
Just a question on environmental and cultural studies. This is basically repair of existing facilities. Shouldn't we just get a negative deck for this without having to go through all that?
I would think typically, yes, we would, but we've had stuff where we get into some of, again, we got to look for those cultural, when the flumes were built, and those studies haven't been done from what I've been told. And so that's why we're getting in there. But typically, yes, if we don't find any of those and we don't find any plants, then we get it's a repair and we get a negative deck on that.
Okay, thank you.
But so we're doing it this time because it's never been done before?
That's my
in essence?
understanding, yes.
Okay. When originally were these built?
They've been all done with PG&E. If we go back a couple of slides, Jen, can we go back? They had the dates on there. 1990 were a couple of them.
Were those rebuild days or?
Those were rebuilds of the wooden flumes.
Right, but when were they originally?
That I do not know. Yeah, I don't know when
2 centuries ago?
the slides occurred or when those happened.
Well, the original, of course, was when the project was built, but
Yeah.
1990 was when PG&E, I guess, upgraded them, and I think 2000. Whether PG&E did any studies on that or not, we don't know.
No,
But if we
I-
find none, then we'll
Yeah.
do the negative deck.
No, I was just curious as to when they originally were built. Were they built before George was born or?
I don't, the flumes would have been built with whenever those slides have occurred. That's why we have flumes typically in there of the landslides. And if you look at the pictures on there, you see where, the evidence of those slides have occurred. And I don't have any historical background on when those occurred and when the original wooden flumes were put in.
Did you have any other comment? No. Okay. A question on the bid award to GHD. Which segments did they design previously for us?
So currently, they have done, we are under construction, from remember, is for flumes 36 and 30 through, or 38 through 40. They've done that one. Flume 44, flume 30, flume the 10, 45, the flume 45 storms. So they've got a lot of history with us with
And
some of those.
because their bid was about almost half of the next bidder, so that always kind of, next two bidders, really.
Right.
And that kind of bothers me, but we've had good experience with them. They've been a dependable contractor. I
Yes.
noticed in their bid material, very professionally done, and they did the bragging rights of what they'd already done for us. So are you comfortable that we won't have cost overruns or anything?
Yeah, the only thing that we would get with that is, again, what usually comes back on the geotechnical. If that's typically what gets us in these areas because of the ground. That's usually what our costs get us when we're under construction too. You know, we can do all the studies to get all the information, but until we put that bucket into the ground and start digging it up and we find out exactly what's underneath those segments, that's what is the biggest surprise almost every single time that we have these things. And that's why we're doing the soundings through there to get a pretty good idea of what's below. But even those are only good to a certain depth, and, you know, we get down below, you know, some of those excavations we're excavating 10, 15 feet below what they were originally resting on. And we get surprised by what gets thrown into the holes.
We've had a lot of geotechnical surprises over the last few years.
Yeah, no use refrigerators or anything like that.
Not typically used refrigerators,
So
but
not
it's
totally rule.
it's usually a lot of silty material that gets us that
Yeah.
instead of trying to go down 10 feet, now we're going down 15 or more. And we've got to get down to that competent material or get to a point where what we call bridging that bad material where we can get the support, yeah, so that we can build up and get competent. That's what hit us on 3840 was, you know, we did a lot of soundings and drillings through there, but there was one segment of wall that, yeah, it surprised, it was full of junk, literal wood stumps and rock, and you've got to excavate all that stuff out.
Do you anticipate the design will be similar to 44, and where there's concrete lined?
I would expect where we can get access to do that, yes. That's typically our quickest way to construct. And that's what our time, you know, we're always up against that time because our construction window is the 1st of October to mid-December to try and get those done. And it's a race to get that. But that's proven to be a very quick way to get things constructed in that time.
And it's easy because it provides access, and then it's,
Right.
yeah, not easy, I didn't mean, I know it's not easy from the tours that you've given Director Anzini and myself, but once it's complete, it looks like it's very stable and
Yes.
a good design. So, we have a
I'll make a motion that we approve option number 1.
thank you, Director Anzini. Thank you, Director Osborne. Any other board comments or questions? Any public comments or questions?
It does not appear there are any members of the public remotely or in person wishing to make a comment at this time.
Thank you, then please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you,
Thank
well
you.
done, thanks. Okay, moving on to item 12, the Folsom Lake intake.
Good morning, members of the board. John Money, Senior Civil Engineer, here for contract change order number 41 to Granite Construction for the Folsom Lake Intake Improvements Project. Next slide. Again, the board in February of 2020 approved a construction contract with Granite Construction Company for $35.5 million and total funding for the project of 42.7. And then most recently, during your last board meeting, the board approved change order number 30 for $473,000. That was for the extra excavation that was required on the project. And change order number 32 for $113,000. That was for the overhead crane modifications that were required. So again, just kind of an overview of the project going from right to left. The first series of boxes you see there are the new electrical equipment, followed by the existing control room, and then a parking area that what is now a parking area used to be encumbered by our electrical equipment. Parking area and our backup generator is housed there. And the bulk, again, what we're talking about is at that far left box. That's where our overhead crane structure is for removing the pumps. And then the pumps and the casings would extend off the page to the left-hand side. Next slide. So this is a cross-section of the overhead crane. And again, what that is going to be used for is for placing and removing the new pumps and their discharge piping. So the crane consists of two parts: the bridge crane, which is used to trolley and store pieces of pipe as they are removed, and then the hoist, which is used to both pull the discharge piping in the pumps and also secure during as each pipe segment is unloaded. So in total, there are 112 segments of that discharge, 20 feet segments of discharge piping, and that's in general what this change order consists of is it's modifications to all 112 segments. After we received a submittal and engineering by the mechanical vendor, they discovered there's one lifting lug. So again, you need 2 points of connection, one to pull those pipes and a second one to secure it while you are removing it. So it was missing one of those lugs, and then due to the additional weight, after everything was said and done, we needed additional welding and a little bit more material on each of those. So when you add that all up, it comes to about $1,700 worth of additional material and labor and welding on each of those for a total of $193,000. So that kind of sums the change order. I did want to, again, give one more heads up. We will be back for one more change order. This is the last one that's significant and known at this time, and that is for in that top right-hand corner. We ran into, I heard you just saying, geotech issues. We ran into some unsuitable material while we were drilling, which required several of the piers to be lengthened. So they had to go down about another 5 feet on, I don't know, about a half dozen of them. That is by, it's a contractual price per linear foot, agreed upon price. So really it's just getting back to the contractor comparing their notes and finding out exactly what that linear footage is. And currently that's estimated about $200,000. So in the next month or two, they have 2 piles that are remaining. We'll be back for that change order. Go ahead, next slide. So funding to date, again, with this, currently we're sitting at just about 3.5% of our project the total contract price in project change orders. With the approval of this change order, it brings us up to about 4%. Again, we're sitting pretty well at this point in the project. We're probably at about 70 to 75% done. And we anticipate that, well, all of the submittals have been in at this point, so we're not looking forward to a lot of design changes or anything else as the project proceeds. So looking pretty fortunate at this time. Next slide. However, the final completion schedule has slipped. Again, this is due with the ongoing drilling in the lake for the piers. The last two piles currently are not, the lake never came up high enough for us to drill the highest two piers. So we now have to wait for the lake to go down in order to drill those with the crane that's mobilized on site. So some significant changes in the schedule as far as shifting work forward and shifting work back. But that has added about another month to the expected completion date. So now we are out into February. But in general, as the options that are presented to the board today, we're asking to approve change order 41 to Granite Construction in the not to exceed amount of $193,276 for additional discharge piping fabrication. Option 2 is to take other action as directed by the board, and option 3 is to take no action. And staff's recommendation.
I'll move option 1.
Thank you, Director Day.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Director Anzini. Any board questions or comments?
Couple of, well, a question or a comment, or two questions. These modifications to all the pipe segments, I mean, I know when you're engineering something, it's hard to foresee everything. You know, was this something that we could have foreseen, or?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an engineering oversight. For sure, the second point of connection was, again, the design engineer's intent was to leave it a little bit flexible for, so that the pump manufacturer and the mechanical contractor and the crane, you know, all these groups can coordinate and kind of get the best price on that. And unfortunately, if you leave it a little bit open like that, it's open to revisions as well. And that's what we saw with both the crane and the discharge piping. So if we had a very firm design, we might, you know, it's a trade-off. Do you open it up to more vendors and a little bit more flexibility, or do you, and maybe get some pricing with that, or do you really nail it down and maybe get some elevated pricing because you only have one option? So
Well, at least better to catch it now than on our first repair.
right, better
Yeah.
better now than when everything's on site and we
Right.
have to modify everything there. So
The other question is, are we considering keeping some of our floating docks out there, given the drought, and being
So-
able to pump lower if we have to?
right, so we have negotiated with Granite to keep those on retainer. So there's, I believe, 4 barges out there right now. They are contractually obligated to keep one on site throughout the project. Originally, we were going to keep one more just to give us some operational flexibility, and then we opted to keep all 4 just in case the lake really does plummet. If it does, considering all the purveyors that are taking water out of Folsom Lake, those might be a really hot commodity and hard to resecure for our site. So kind of to ensure us in the long run, we've committed to renting those through, I think, October, I believe.
Of 2022?
20,
Or
no,
2021?
2020, yeah. And at that point, we,
21. Well, should
wait,
we?
where are we at?
I know,
We
I
lost
know.
a year.
October of
did.
this year, 2021.
Well, should we consider, I don't know what the cost of putting them in and extracting them is, but should we consider, you know, if this coming winter turns out to be not a good one, should we consider keeping one on site, basically, in anticipation of needing it next year?
Right. I'd say we would reevaluate at that time. The price of placing those pumps is fairly high. I want to say.
Or the barges, you mean?
Yeah, fairly. It's about 60,000, I think,
Yeah.
to get them in and out, which is again why that also factored into us retaining the pumps.
So we may want to think about extending it
You
as
know,
insurance.
we can take a look at it. I know, I don't have the levels memorized, but we can operate at a higher lake level than if it drops too much more, the M&I guys downstream get severely impacted, and the Bureau would need to pump up and out. So let me consider that, and we can brief the board afterwards.
Mr. President, if there's a silver lining to the low lake levels, is that expedited the installation of all of that equipment that would have normally been underwater, and even though we're delayed because of extraneous other issues, has that helped matters?
We have yet to see, actually, I just missed it. We had our dive safety and coordination meeting this morning. So we're, again, as part of that reworking of the schedule, we're bringing the divers out a little bit early. And they are going to be mobilizing to do the support structures for the casing moving up to try to make up some of that time. The divers will be, pretty much at the minimum depth. They're still, I think, going down up to 30, 40 feet at the deepest end. But that, that could have been 140 feet in a couple of years back. So we would think, but all that's basically priced in to the contractor's bid. So if there's any cost savings or any efficiencies there, we might have some negotiating chips, but it's per contract. And we'll see how that goes over the next probably month and a half.
Thank you.
So even with the current change order and the anticipated change order, it looks as if this project will come in either on budget or underneath with a little bit of reserve left over.
I believe so. Yeah. I
Thank
think
you very much.
again,
I like that.
I think we're sitting pretty good as of
Good.
current.
Okay, thank you. Any other board comments? Are there any public comments on this item?
At this time, it does not appear there are any members of the public in person or remotely wishing to address the board.
Thank you very much. Please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this point, we'll go take a 5-minute break and go into closed session on labor negotiations. Jose, do you have a time estimate? Pardon?
4:15.
Okay. So we'll reconvene no earlier than 11:05. All right. Thank you very much.
And for the purposes of the public participating remotely, this meeting will be closed and we will reopen once the board reconvenes, no sooner than 11:05.
Any assignments?
We could have report out a closed session prior to the review of assignments.
Okay, thank you. That's 5. In closed session, the board discussed labor negotiations and no reportable action was taken.
No review of assignment, just a couple direction staff.
Thank you. In which case, we'll adjourn until our August 9th meeting. Thank you very much.
And for board members, just take a quick look at the tentative items list. And if you have any questions, please reach out to General Manager Abercrombie or myself.